Every A-League club's underrated hero. There's plenty of star players across the A-League. Every club has, their marquee signing and their big name player. But what I wanted to focus on is some of the players who maybe don't get the spotlight that maybe they deserve. So we're going to go through an alphabetical order. And we're starting off with Adelaide United. For the Reds, I've gone for Ryan Kitto. Because I think for me, Ryan Kitto is a player who's had a really interesting evolution. If you think back to a few years ago, he spent some time with the Jets and as well had a couple stints with Adelaide, but he was really an out-and-out winger, an attacking player. And for the past couple of years has been shifted into a fullback role, which I think initially he probably didn't necessarily want to play. But now, like for the recent season, he was a full-time left back at Adelaide United and performed in that role really, really well. The consistency that he brought into his game this season I thought was really impressive. He played 27 games last season, so only missed a couple games. And had a fantastic campaign. Of course, Adelaide were just one game away from the grand final. I was considering it was One Day as well. I thought One Day had a great season in defensive midfield. But Ryan Kitto, maybe one that people don't think of as often. Brisbane Roar. For the Roar, I went for Kai Trewin, the young centre-back who, for the last 2 consecutive seasons, has played 25 games. 25 games in the recent campaign, 25 games in the campaign before. So it's racked up 50 A-League matches over the last couple of years. I think does a really decent job defensively. Obviously, it's tricky when the team's chopping and changing and formations were changing for Brisbane. That defense wasn't completely solid last year. But Kai Trewin puts in a really solid effort more often than not. Central Coast Mariners up next. My team, of course. And I've gone for Dan Hall, who I thought stepped up so well last season, Dan Hall. When you look at that Mariners backline heading into last season, Kai Rolls, Ruan Tongic, Dan Hall, there was an expectation that Mariners were going to sign, they needed, at least one more centre back, maybe an experienced centre back. They opted not to go for that down that route, and Ruan Tongic was missing, with injury for much of the campaign. Dan Hall played 23 games last season and was fantastic. He's very good at reading the game and, of course, a fantastic tackler, fantastic with the ball as well, great with his distribution. And, of course, the highlight for me, if you might remember that late Dan Hall goal, the last-minute equaliser when Mariners were down to 10 men away to Western Sydney Wanderers. Dan Hall tapping in from close range. Next up, we've got Macarthur FC. I went for Charles Mombwa. I think just because he does a really solid role in that midfield, considering that there's a lot of work to be done in the formation they played last season, and they didn't really have. Charles Mombwa was sort of the defensive midfielder. Tommy Orr was slotting in there, but Tommy Orr's not a defensive midfielder. Jordan Much was coming in for some games as well. But Charles Mombwa, he played 25 games last season and puts in a really solid effort. His work rate is second to none in that Bulls side, and I think deserves the title of underrated hero. For Melbourne City, I've gone for Nuno Reis. Melbourne City, one of the clubs who almost they have like a star player in like every single position. He doesn't necessarily get the spotlight that his other teammates get. His ability to week in, week out form that really solid partnership alongside Curtis Good. We know how good Curtis Good is, and he's been in the A-League for the last couple of years now, Nuno Reis, and just super solid. Super, super solid. For Melbourne Victory, the crosstown rivals, I've gone for another international player, Ryan Marchand. And again, it's a similar situation. I think for both those Melbourne teams, they've got star players everywhere. But Ryan Marchand, I know he missed a few games here and there with injury, but overall settled in so quickly into the A-League and fulfilled that defensive midfield role, partnering up with Josh Belante in midfield. Really calm and composed on the ball too, where every time he's on the ball, great with his distribution and a really just calming presence, I imagine, for that Melbourne Victory squad. For the Newcastle Jets, now, I almost went with Angus Thurgate, and I wonder, if Jets fans would even classify Angus Thurgate as an underrated player. I don't think he is anymore. I think maybe a year ago he would have been, and we know how good Angus Thurgate is if you watch Newcastle Jets this season. But I went for someone else who sort of allowed Angus Thurgate to flourish, and that was Brandon Wilson, who they signed halfway through the season. Brandon Wilson only played 11 games for Newcastle Jets, but I think Newcastle fans will know what he did to that Jet squad. The defensive midfield partnership for the Jets was chopping and changing. Mario Kez never really got settled, and Brandon Wilson was brought in and did a really, really solid job, and I was really shocked that Jets didn't lock him down for the upcoming season because I thought he was fantastic. The reason why he allowed Thurgate to flourish is because we know Angus Thurgate has got a massive work rate, loves to get up and get involved in the attack, and Brandon Wilson was that more defensive-minded midfielder who was able to cover the space vacated by Angus Thurgate, and also, with Pena moving around, plenty of attackers, creating things in that Newcastle Jet squad. Brandon Wilson was just steadying the ship in midfield. For Perth Glory, poor Perth Glory, man. No, for me, I've gone for Giordano Colli. I thought, considering when you look at that Perth squad, and obviously one of the big problems for them last season is how many players they had missing through injury. The injury list was just monumental. Colli stepped up in a leadership role. I mean, he played 20 games overall, and Glory fans, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think he was the captain of the academy side, and I think that carried across in games where Perth Glory, much of their lineup was just basically the youth squad. I mean, Colli basically became the captain in those situations and showed a lot of promise. And I think for this upcoming season, he's secured a contract. Could take his game to another level if he continues to get that regular game time. You get the sense that Ruben Zakovic has a lot of faith in Colli, and had a really decent season for Perth Glory despite all their hardships this past year. Sydney FC. Now, the player that I picked for me is a player that I love watching. An incredibly talented player, Max Burgess. I love watching Max Burgess. I think he's really slick on the ball, really dynamic. He played 24 games for the Sky Blues this past year, 3 goals, 4 assists. When you look at that Sydney FC squad, which obviously underperformed this past season, and you'd probably say Anthony Caceres was probably the shining light. Elvis Kamsoba had a great season. Burgess, I don't think receives enough credit for how good he is, and I think is so close to pushing his game to that next level. Versatile too, whether he's probably can play up top as a striker. He plays as a number 10. He was even being deployed as a defensive midfielder at times last season as well. But Max Burgess, for me, the underrated hero at Sydney FC. Next up, we've got Wellington Phoenix. And if you've been listening to the podcast, I've ranted about this guy before. Scott Wooten. Scott Wooten, for me, is absolutely the underrated hero at Wellington Phoenix. The job that he did, arriving mid-season and just tightening up that back line, helped Wellington Phoenix to get into the top 6. Gail Sandoval was the mid-season signing that stole the spotlight for the Knicks, but Scott Wooten, fantastic, underrated hero. Western Sydney Wanderers, again, couple that I was chopping and changing with, but I went for Adama Traore. I think because obviously a lot of the talk around Western Sydney Wanderers and even their own fan base was, all the negativity that was going on and how much they were struggling and they just weren't getting results. I mean, Adama Traore, I thought week in, week out, even when Wanderers weren't winning games, was really, really solid and wore the captain's armband for a number of games as well. And then the final team, Western United. For me, I've gone for the Japanese centre-back. Absolutely fantastic, Tomoki Imai. And look, the main reason is he's playing, his centre-back partner was one of the, for me at least, was the signing of the season, was one of the star players in the A-League from this past season, Liam Lacroix. I mean, Tomoki Imai did such a fantastic job. And let me know, drop in a little questionnaire box, who is your club's underrated hero? Would love to hear if you've got some different suggestions, maybe someone that I haven't thought of. But for me, those are the 12 underrated heroes